So I'm going to say a good morning, guys, and welcome to our webinar on achieving cyber safety in an OT-IT converged world. As I mentioned, it's Cybersecurity Awareness Month, so we're really trying to bring you a lot of educational webinars and interviews, really to highlight awareness this month and give you good educational resources to help you really embrace security as a mindset. I'm now going to hand over to Daniel Rovis, our host and moderator for today's session.
Thank you very much, Carrie, and thank you for Tech Central, Claroty, and especially Skybox for allowing us this time to learn and understand. And, you know, we do a lot of preparation for this. This has been a tough session for me to prep for because OT is such a new concept. Yet when I spent a little bit of time with Alistair and Justin and Tomer, they've really brought me around to why it's important. And I hope you go through the same journey. But I just want to explain who we've got on the panel today. We've got Alistair Williams, who's based in the UK. It's not his fault, but he is there. He is the Director for Sales and for Engineering in EMEA and Skybox Security. Alistair has got a long history of working in security. He's been a consultant, an architect, product manager, and even delved into marketing. He has been in pre-sales and support. So he's done the work, he's put up the systems, and he's borne the brunt of when attacks have come through. As I said, Alistair is based in the UK and is a regular speaker in the European market on cybersecurity. Tomer Ben Shalom, if you don't know where that name is from, he's from Israel. He's Claroty Business Development for EMEA. Loads and loads of experience. He's older than he looks in selling security solutions, architecting and optimizing them. And he likes to give visibility without impacting on production. So what's going on in the deep, dark areas of the factory or the work environment, and how security solutions alert us to stop things before they happen rather than fixing them once they have. And then we've got Justin, who's based in Pretoria.
Johannesburg.
Oh, close enough. Technical Director for Skybox South Africa. And Justin brings sanity to my discussion. He brings a local context, a local flair, and he'll be talking around local incidents as well. It's an interesting way to make a living working in security. And this month of security awareness really gives us the opportunity to get into areas where few of us from a business perspective are ever allowed in. It seems like a closed environment until you start speaking to the people. And we see how much of an impact the security guys have on business. Now we've gone from IT security into OT security. Alistair, just give us a high-level overview. What is OT?
So at a really high level, operational technology, or OT, is essentially the use of hardware or software to monitor and control physical processes, devices, and infrastructure. The main component of OT is industrial control systems, and these are used to control and manage the devices, systems, controls, and networks that manage those industrial processes. The most common of which is SCADA, so supervisory control and data acquisition systems, and also distributed control systems as well. Now, traditionally, these infrastructures are closed point-to-point networks. And because traditionally they were closed, the risk and vulnerability of cyber attack was relatively low. And what we also found is that the protection systems were unique and proprietary, and often that comprised of just excluding or ring fencing those infrastructures from the traditional enterprise security network.
Okay. So we had them closed off and they were safe. Why have we now opened them, Justin? Why are we opening them if it was working before?
The idea of convergence between IT and OT is actually happening for quite a few reasons. For instance, you have now got really advanced equipment that needs third-party support from the various vendors. You have got the stakeholders of the organizations who want to start getting a lot more information on their processes, the outputs, understanding how much of a certain item they're going to manufacture. They are looking to understand how to create efficiency by monitoring things like inputs and outputs. They can see how much it's better to manufacture in the evenings as opposed to during the day. There's just the whole idea where we're now starting to collect a fortune of data from these systems, and we're able to start analyzing them. Another example is traditionally we've gone from manual manufacturing processes to starting to use a lot of automation and orchestration.
Okay, that's excellent. So we can't afford to keep them closed anymore. It's funny, someone must have known that I was facilitating this because I got a digital twin article last night regarding what we were doing in a manufacturing environment. And then 1,000 Ks away, we would have the replication in a digital environment. Alistair, I know it's off-piste and it's not part of our question, but are you seeing these digital twins propagating more and more and more because the OT networks are opening up?
I think so. And I think, to Justin's point as well, it also probably helps to consider where are industrial control systems used, because I think traditionally they were more akin to things like valves and these types of fairly industrial controls and actuators. And actually what we're seeing now is more prevalence in systems which are sort of much closer to home. So, solar power is kind of a good example where many solar panel systems have control systems that monitor the generation of electric, and some of them will actually sort of turn and face the sun as the sun moves around. So a lot of this is coming much closer to home, and even areas like building management systems, HVAC, air conditioning, transportation, traffic lights, monitoring traffic flows. And, so OT and SCADA and industrial control systems are being used in a much wider range of things. And I think that is largely driven by the fact that they're smarter and also they're much easier to manage. And I think this is where terminology like industrial Internet of Things, which is obviously aligned very closely with Internet of Things, obviously in sort of our personal lives, is driving adoption of these types of technologies within industry as a whole.
So are we gentrifying the blue collar IT at the moment? Is that what's happening? Is this is becoming more sexy because there's more impact you can make on the business if you're getting into this in the manufacturing cycle or in the machine management side? Are we reaching the point where we have to get involved there because it's the next frontier of optimization for the organization? Is that why there's been this sudden upsurge?
That goes back to the convergence topic. So it's easier to apply IT analytics to OT if the two infrastructures are converged with one another. With that, those additional analytics brings the ability to streamline processes and operate more efficiently. So in areas like manufacturing, being able to understand perhaps where are the bottlenecks? Do I really need the biggest, fastest machine if I've got bottlenecks elsewhere within the process? That means that sort of machine towards the start of the process can't work at full capacity. So being able to apply that analytics is driving a lot of efficiencies and cost saving, and also allowing organizations to kind of plan maintenance windows preventatively, making sure that the process as a whole can continue functioning without having an impact on the ROI, but ultimately that process and those systems need to be delivering against.
Awesome. That convergence, we are seeing some of the benefits that are coming through. You've touched on the devices becoming smarter and easier to manage. We're looking at the streamlining of the processes that are coming through. Is it not quite a scary thing to converge these environments, Justin? Does it mean we have to re-architect? And I know we're talking security. I'm just establishing our baseline, but do we have to re-architect our IT environment to do this convergence? Or is it a natural progression now? Are the tech hardware on both sides keeping up?
So traditionally, the IT side of security is looking pretty good. The OT side is lagging behind. But the OT side, there is a lot of connectivity between all the different devices. I think that an example is you're not going to go and take an old factory and replace all the equipment and bring it up to high tech. You typically find that these organizations are starting to bring in these technologies when they are building new factories.
Okay, so we're not rip and replacing. We're actually augmenting it and changing it at the right time when it makes sense. Okay, that's cool.
Correct.
Alistair,
I was just,
going to
add something to that as well. So I think an augmentation strategy is absolutely the right way to start with, right? Because if you look at a lot of industrial control systems, they have long lifespans, right? It's not like a laptop that has a lifespan of maybe 3 to 5 years after which you plan to replace it, right? These devices typically have an intended lifespan of, 8 or more years, easily in, 10 years plus. And a lot of this infrastructure has been put into place relatively recently, and a rip and replace, just simply isn't justifiable. Now, that said, in parallel, organizations should be thinking about security by design going forwards, so that as they look to introduce new capabilities, whatever they might be, whether it be new data center power distribution units, HVAC controllers, building management systems for lifts or whatever it might be, they should be thinking about these types of things to ensure that they've got the right protection mechanisms in place going forwards. But in parallel, working on that sort of augmentation strategy of how do I actually understand what I have, in the context of OT today? Where are those risks? Where are those weaknesses? And then start devising plans to mitigate any risks that may exist.
Are there any reasons that are being pushed from a standards perspective or governmental laws that are making these OT environments so safe, health and safety and those sorts of things? Or are those set to the side? They aren't really?
Yeah, so I just want to add, and also relating to your question, and there is the augmentation in terms of the technology and what is the actual environment evolution. And there is also the augmentation of the state of mind of the personas in the organization.
Okay.
And that needs to come along with the augmentation of the actual physical environment. And that is where, as there is a gap in terms of, as Justin mentioned, where the IT is today and where the OT is today, this is also where you'd find a similar gap in terms of the state of mind. So as the OT gets more and more connected, it usually does not go through the IT policies and procedures. It actually creates its own kind of connectivity. So it could be through the IT, but actually going outside without any supervision, governance from the IT. And the other thing is that the OT persona state of mind is still about, hey, we have to make sure that we are running and we are manufacturing safely, the process integrity and the efficiency. And there is still an educational gap here in terms of, hey, is cyber now, the fact that we are becoming more and more connected, more and more digitalized, is there a real risk here that may affect the security, may affect the process, may affect the integrity of what we're doing? So those are the two main areas that I see that are evolving.
I really like what you've highlighted there. It comes back to what Alistair was saying is almost the organization has built up a pillar and then OT is building its own pillar at some stage. And that thing can be exposed to more risks that we've taken for granted, we've taken care of in the mainstream business. One of the points that, Alistair, you made in our preparation is SCADA equipment was controlled, used to be manually, now it's automating and being automated and growing, creating larger attack surfaces. So this OT environment attack surface is relatively new in the world that we're looking after. I'm assuming, Alistair, it's not new for the threat actors out there, for the baddies.
Yeah, it's not new. And I think actually some of what we've seen as a result of the pandemic is also driving OT's sort of increased vulnerability. So if you look in the IT world with the pandemic, sort of the prevalence of remote working and VPNs being deployed, that's driven a huge spike in the bad actors, if you want to call them that, sort of targeting VPN gateways and finding exploits and vulnerabilities to take advantage of. Now, that obviously directly impacts IT, but it also has a direct impact on OT as well, because a lot of the OT infrastructure, as we talked about, is typically isolated, but it still needs remote monitoring and management. And typically the way that was provided was to, obviously ring fence the OT infrastructure that we talked about, but then provide some form of VPN capability to allow that remote monitoring to take place. And obviously with the spike in VPN vulnerabilities, that obviously directly increases the attack surface for OT as well. Going back to what Thomas said as well, I think, we were talking about those pillars of IT and OT. IT historically has been very focused on confidentiality, integrity, and availability, whereas OT was predominantly and primarily focused on availability. So the mindsets have been very different. Therefore, they've had very different objectives, and therefore what they do and how they go about what they're doing takes a very different approach. So I think, we talked about education and awareness. That's absolutely the first part of it. And then it's down to sort of organizational appetite to do something as a result of their new understanding and education as to the risk that this poses and the impact that this can have.
But that's why we're in October, man. It's Security Awareness Month. We've got to get everybody onto the same level. So we are wrapping the end of the year. It seems like this year's carried on for decades. Where are we from a perspective of the security and vulnerabilities as we stand now? And I know that's such a loaded question. For all of our attendees, I apologize for that, but I just got this really great Skybox Security 5 trends to watch in 2021-22, and I had to segue it in, and it seemed like a good place. So, Alistair, tell us, where do you think we are from a security perspective now without the corny Daniel Bad acting there? What is the state of the world?
Yeah, so I think we're all aware that trajectory for new vulnerabilities increases year over year. I mean, that's not news to any of us, I'm sure. Specifically putting some metrics around that, in the first half of 2021, we saw 9,500 brand new vulnerabilities that previously weren't known and didn't exist. Now, what's interesting about that as well, when you start delving down into the detail, was that there were 46% of new vulnerabilities in OT. So the rate at which the OT risk and vulnerability landscape is getting worse is obviously pretty significant. What's also interesting as well is if you look back historically, exploits tended to be very much focused on leveraging historical vulnerabilities that have been known for, perhaps a year, 2 years, 3 years. What's interesting is the weaponization of new vulnerabilities. And what we're seeing is that 30% of the new vulnerabilities are being exploited in the wild. So 30% of 9,500, we're very quickly seeing being weaponized and being actively exploited in the wild, which is pretty new, a new occurrence over the last couple of months. And the other thing that's interesting here as well is the increased targeting of vulnerabilities at network infrastructure components. So the infrastructure that supports the industrial control system. So the routers, the switches, the load balancers, etc. And again, there's been a 20% increase in vulnerabilities targeting network infrastructure equipment, which can have a significant knock-on effect as well.
I want to pause. I know I'm going to ask Justin just to expand on some more tangible than stats on examples in South Africa. And Justin, I want you to get ready there. But we've got 3 questions that are sitting. Leroy, who likes coffee, Lucky, who should go and buy a lotto ticket, and Prishal, who I know, have asked questions which I'd like to pose to you. And the first one is, Leroy has asked, how do you identify and deploy tools that can provide the appropriate amount of visibility and control over IT and OT assets? And there could be a thesis there, but Tomo, do you want to take that in a succinct way? And do they differ between OT and IT, as I'd like to add on?
All right. So let me just start from the point when we talk about, and relaying back to what Alistair said, that when you're talking about the OT environment, you're talking about people that their task is to keep the process running, to make sure it's producing, and everything is done in a safe way. But not only that, okay, where it really, really differs from the IT is that in the OT, even if I'm a plant manager, I'm not king of the castle, I'm not king of the house, okay? So if I have a system, I have a Windows server, which is part of a Schneider Electric system, which is controlling some production line, okay? And I cannot just go and put some endpoint protection on that machine. I would need to ask Schneider Electric if I can add something, if I can put something. They would need to make sure it does not interfere with the process, that it doesn't have any harm, that it's not posing any risks. And it's most likely I will not be able to do anything, okay, with that respect. Okay. So what is really, really the main difference, and this is the big challenge between IT and OT, that OT, I would say, is like a totally different animals, right? Okay. It's not your IT, TCP IP stack, your regular IT, Windows, Linux, whatever, even Unix servers. It is the controllers of Schneider Electrics, the RTUs of Schweitzer, metering of Bentley Nevada, and so forth. It's like really, really tailored, unique equipment, which is communicating in proprietary protocols that are not standardized, that are not documented, and so forth.
Alistair, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so you probably just saw me writing a note because I wanted to kind of pick up on something that Thomas said. So, I think what's important, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier, availability is key in OT. And the typical security approach of applying agents to things, whether it be, endpoint discovery and response agent, antivirus, whatever it is, they themselves pose an availability risk. And I think that's the mindset that organizations that are sort of facing the OT security challenge really struggle with. And it's how can they implement security without risking what they consider to be the most important thing, which is the availability of the assets. The other thing that I would go on to say is I think how you defend OT has to start with the notion of you can't defend what you can't see.
We've got Lucky who's unluckily asked us a question about how do we assess the risk of their OT environment? And Justin, I want you to dive into that. Where do we start? If Lucky is the head of security and he's looking after the financial area and all the rest of it, how does he start in his OT environment?
The very first stage of any cybersecurity iterative process would be identification, monitoring your existing networks, starting to look at your threats and your threat landscape. Then the second stage would to identify your priorities and then start are you able to hear me clearly?
Yeah, your headset's just playing your game. So I want you to pause there. Alistair, what Justin is talking around, do you see over the waters that the OT security team is separate to our traditional security team, or are we one band of brothers and sisters?
They're definitely separate. I think they are beginning to come together, and I think it really depends on the sort of the maturity level of the organization in question. Okay. There are some organizations where those teams are very much more joined up with one another from an interaction perspective. There are others just having very different conversations and you've got very different priorities.
Okay, stop again. What do you recommend?
From my perspective, what I would recommend is kind of a multifaceted approach. So on one hand, you need to understand what it is that you have. So having a means by which to identify where your legacy and current and future infrastructure is and what it comprises of. And that's a piece of work in its own right. Then sort of emphasizing what Justin says, it's then understanding what is within that infrastructure and how those devices are interacting and communicating with one another. And then going through a process of categorization, because clearly, whether it's IT or OT, not every device in an infrastructure is as important as every other device, right? Each device is playing a different role, has a different level of importance. And there's absolutely a categorization exercise that needs to happen so that the organization looks at each component once they know that it exists and really documents and defines, what it is, who the owner of that is, what purpose does it serve, what is the impact, what's the consequences from a confidentiality and availability and integrity perspective, and to kind of, once that's then understood, start then applying, prioritization. What risks are there?
I want to get to that. I want to get Justin to finish. Let's try your headset again. So we've done what Alistair's just emphasized. We've identified, we've categorized. So we've seen what's in the OT environment. We've categorized what the features and functions are. Then where do we go to, Justin?
Then we've got to start modeling everything that we've got, all the equipment, understanding how it all connects together.
Okay.
And then we've got to understand the risks involved, all the different kinds of risks. That could be regulatory, there could be vulnerability, there could be exposure.
Yeah.
And then you've got to come up with solutions. What are you going to do first?
Okay.
How are you going to start resolving these issues?
Okay, so just to answer that question, Justin, does Skybox offer a paint by numbers evaluation of your OT environment? Yes or no?
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Okay, so Lucky, if you want to fast track that and not find out for yourself, contact Justin and they can get the factory floor gone. We've got one more question. I think I'm going to put that to Tomer. Does CIS controllers cater for the OT environment? Because I didn't understand it. I'm just going to throw it at Tomer. Shame. See if he knows.
Okay, sure. Yeah, of course. I mean, the safety equipment is definitely part of the entire OT environment. And from our own experience, we are providing the visibility and the monitoring and the risk assessment for the CIS systems. That's part of our domain, absolutely.
Okay. So our last question, I'm going to go back to my questions that I actually allowed you guys to prep for, but this is from the mouse in the house, Anonymous. I don't usually allow anonymous questions to come through, but Alistair, I thought this was quite a good one and really posed to you. I think I asked it earlier, but this one's much more eloquent. So if you're Anonymous, well done. If OT is traditionally a closed network, independent of IT and the internet, then why not keep the network this way to prevent cybersecurity breaches, which are typically internet-driven?
So I think that goes back to the benefits of convergence. So the business benefits and ultimately the efficiencies and savings that organizations can see by having improved analytics, improved intercommunication between IT and OT. You know, examples of this might be things like just-in-time processing. So manufacturers who are building something and being able to adjust based upon demand. Well, the orders for the goods and services via their e-commerce site are almost certainly catered for via the traditional IT infrastructure, and having a means of controlling the industrial control processes to ramp up or ramp down or turn on new manufacturing lines is of extreme benefit to these types of organizations.
I think what I typed while you were chatting there is that if you don't understand why convergence is there and you're tempted to close it off, just in 30 minutes, for me, it's come across that you need to be spoken to by someone who can talk to you of the benefits that are out there. You can't close it. And as easy as it seems just to ram it down, you would be doing a disservice to your team. So I think we've got to get over that quite quickly and move into, it is a converged environment. How do we take the security view, which is to minimize the impact of the threat actors? Have we got any OT?
I just
yes,
want to add one small thing about it. On top of it, we are already almost 2 years in the COVID circumstances. So remote working has become the norm. And that is also true for the shop floor, for the production lines. Technicians, engineers, they now connect directly to fix problems, to pull data, whatever it is. They are connecting from their home office or homes, actually, all the way directly to the production line. And that is, again, it's something inevitable. People don't go on site these days.
And to that point as well, that connectivity will be by far more secure where it's managed through IT. Because if you look at, and I know you may go there in a moment, if you look at a lot of the historical attacks, they have been via basically backdoors for remote management and monitoring. So there is absolutely a need for those types of activities. It's always going to be best managed by IT. And then consequently, you need that interconnectivity between OT and IT to facilitate that.
That's why I was quite interested in your answer that they're separate teams from a security perspective, OT and IT. And maybe we'll get down there again, Alistair, and we can debate that over a glass of wine. But OT vulnerabilities have just been skyrocketing. And the vulnerabilities, according to your report, is 46% up year on year. That's staggering amount of increase there. Justin, is that coming out in the real world? Are we seeing an impact of these things? Is there anything local where people have been affected?
Absolutely. So before I talk local, I'd actually like to talk on a global level. So Alice just talked about the 46% of increased OT vulnerabilities, but these organizations are not only being hit with OT vulnerabilities, they're also being hit with IT vulnerabilities. So if you look at attacks that have happened in the past on the OT side of things, we could be talking Stuxnet, which was against Iran. We could be talking about spear phishing attacks, which caused a smelter to explode, I think, in Germany. We're talking about attacks on the water purification systems in the Ukraine. Those are very focused OT attacks. In South Africa, we've also seen a blend of IT and OT attacks. So we recently saw a massive ransomware that took out Transnet. And what this actually affected on an IT attack, it affected a fortune of production. So for instance, because the Port Authority wasn't able to export goods, we had to get rid of and destroy 45 tons of grade A South African meat for export, as well as an absolute fortune of oranges because we export our citrus. So the port wasn't able to work effectively because of a ransomware attack on the IT side of things.
Wow. And Tome, is that the same in the rest of the world? Are these OT attacks just targeting bigger and bigger people?
Yeah, I would say probably the last major incident that hit the headlines. There are other ones which do not hit the headlines. The Colonial Pipeline, eventually this attack led to people not being able to even fuel their cars all across the Northeast corridors of the US. And again, it was not ICS targeted attack like the Triton in Saudi Aramco that was hitting the CIS system, the safety system of the Schneider electric controller. But it hit and it spilled over towards the OT side and it brought in a total shutdown. So it's constantly growing.
But who's doing this? Who are these people? Can we not take them out and publicly flay them? But who does this?
So, all right. So like in general cybersecurity, we have all the actors. We have state actors. We have OT ransom attacks. We have internal insiders, disgruntled employees. And we have just a lot of stuff that is happening even unintentionally. It's just kind of a spillover propagation of some malware.
So let's go back. You just made one big one, which is something you called a state actor.
Yeah.
Well, what is that? Is that like, I don't know if this is being recorded, so I probably can't say a country, Nambia, that goes after Transnet and the Nambian IT team has a bone to pick with Transnet. We're honestly talking about that's not just in the movies.
That's not in the movies. That has been the reality for the last, 20 years.
Wow. We have the coolest jobs ever. This is like we are protecting against national. Alistair, he's also said insiders, and I know about that. But we put something in our prep teenagers. So we
And I think that's predominantly for kind of kudos and notoriety, right? I mean, there's nothing cooler than being able to say to your mates that are kind of the same, computer science degree course as you are, hey, by the way, that was me, so there's definitely a bit of that as well. And then you've also got the activists, people wanting to make political statements, right? And, you've definitely seen some of that as well. I mean, I guess it takes different forms. I mean, in the UK, we've had people gluing themselves to the motorways, and the same thing happens in IT and OT as well, right? So it's very prevalent across, all the different areas that we just described.
So not to laugh at it. I mean, these are big impact things. How are they getting in there, though? I mean, we've got one question from Anonymous, again, is on a roll. We're the cyber police in this. Surely a Skybox is not the cyber police. Surely the cyber police are out there doing something. Or are we like frontiersmen? We have to protect our own homesteads.
I'll just say that the one thing about cyber is the fact that it's really hard to do attribution, right? So it's really hard to get to the source. Like a police, okay, if there are thieves or other criminals, you would eventually chase them down and bring them to court. This is very, very, very hard. I'm not saying it's not possible. So eventually the idea is, how do you protect yourself? How do you manage all the different risks? How do you understand the attack surface better? And how...
So basically you're saying the police aren't there. We have to protect ourselves. The anonymous question is actually a really good one.
Yeah.
Is that we're on our own.
In a way, but you would see, I think probably this question or this point was raised before. You asked about, where is the government? We do see more and more compliance requests, directives, and even regulation, like the NIST directive, IEC 62443. There's dozens of them that are creating a framework that's helping you as an industrial organization, how to eventually at least manage the risks and hopefully add more controls and the attack surface and the risk.
Alistair, you wanted to add something there, but I've actually got a pointed question for you as well.
So I was just going to add, a lot of these attacks are cross-border. So there isn't a huge amount that the police in any given country could do, even if they wanted to. Yes, there is clearly collaboration between different country police departments and what have you, but it's not at the sort of the level that you would need to kind of make any meaningful impact here.
So it's like, nah, you can't get me. That's dreadful. Okay, Dale has actually asked a great question, is how do I find out where our OTICS assets are and how they're interconnected to know the true status of our security? Does Skybox do something for customers like this, or is it a manual exercise?
So this is why also we partner with Claroty, for example. Okay. So, you've got the two different types of technology, right? You can monitor the network, whether it be the IT or OT network, in order to understand what communication and connectivity is on that network. And that's obviously one way you can identify what assets are attached to that network. But in order to ensure that you get complete visibility, you need to know and identify the extent to which your network exists, right? Okay. Because if you're putting a monitoring device on one network segment, it's only going to have visibility of the traffic that's traversing that one network that it's attached to. Now, obviously, there's various techniques that you can use to kind of replicate traffic to monitoring devices. But ultimately, if you've got a very geographically diverse network, you're going to need multiple sensors to give you that visibility. And that's where Skybox can kind of begin to play a part to allow organizations to map out and build a model of their infrastructure so that they can then ensure that as they scan those networks and place sensors on those networks to give them that next level of visibility, they're doing so in all of the places that they would need to get that complete visibility of those endpoint devices and of the communication that's occurring between them.
So an unfair question for me, another one, so I'll give it to Alistair. From interest, from Dale saying, I want visibility, to issue of report on a fairly complicated network, how long is that time? What is the time span that we're looking at?
It varies by organization, but I can give some data points. And it's actually a fairly old case study that we did with a financial services organization in the UK who were actually going through a merger scenario. And in their environment, they had approximately 1,000 firewalls, about 13 or so thousand other network infrastructure components, and about 450,000 endpoints. It took us elapsed time from start of project to end of project, about 30 days to map their infrastructure. Now, obviously, it's a big project, right? So there's resource and effort and project management that needs to go into that. But again, it goes back to, what is the organizational appetite to solve that problem and answer that question. Okay. And that particular organization had a very clear reason why they wanted to do that. And actually, consequently of completing that project, they were able to realize some significant cost savings as a result of that project and achieving that visibility ahead of time.
Okay. Justin, a question for you. When you're talking to CISOs, security officers, security teams, what's the biggest resistance that you get when it comes to OT security and rolling out programs that Alistair's just spoken about?
There's two major issues. The first one is they don't believe that they've got a problem. They don't believe that the networks are connected because this is what they've been told, and they don't have any proof otherwise. The second major blocker is actually not from the CISO side of things because he does want security. It's primarily from the engineering side, from the OT side of the networks. Because I have to bring up again the CIA triad where IT is typically concerned with confidentiality. Is my information kept encrypted? Is my information safe? Integrity. No one can modify my information, like no one can go and change values in my bank account. But in OT, it's all about uptime. It's all about availability. So the engineers are very worried that when you connect up these IT networks, if you start connecting everything by Ethernet, all the different kinds of equipment, if you start adding encryption, monitoring agents, you could start causing things like latency. So they simply want everything to be up.
So OT is about running. OT is about running. We want to keep those manufacturing environments running. It's not necessarily bells and whistles. And IT is about privacy and keeping that data. How do you build security resilience into OT then? And that came from Charles, by the way. Hi, Charles. Nice to see you. His camera's not on again. Have to beat Charles. Oh, no, you can't. Charles, you can't. You're an attendee. Sorry, buddy. Justin, that was for you. How do we build security resilience into OT?
Well, the first stage is identification and starting to identify all of your attack surfaces and attack vectors and start prioritizing them so that you can start mitigating those risks. Another way is to start adhering to specific standards, policies, and procedures. For instance, following things like NERC-CIP, which is almost how the American regulators, if you are at home and you've got solar power and you want to feed power back into the grid, your home setup has to be compliant. So there's compliances that you have to follow. Well, there's best practices. Segmentation is absolutely massive. Separating different parts of your network so that if someone can get into somewhere, they can't get to another place. A local example is I went to a mine and the people looking after the CCTV system had connected their own 3G router into the CCTV system, and there wasn't any segmentation between the actual mines and the CCTV. They were all running on the same physical network. So segmentation is absolutely key.
So our 5 million rand security system has just been rendered null and void because
but that's not unique. That's not unique though, right? I mean, I've seen a customer who had a solar monitor device attached to their corporate IT network, but the default behavior of that device was that it published its own Wi-Fi SSID that had a default password that was available on the internet. And the SSID was the name of the device. So anybody looking at Wi-Fi could see what the device was. A simple Google, you'd find the password for the SSID. You could connect to its local Wi-Fi network and hop across onto the corporate LAN. So, you know, this is not uncommon by any means.
I just have one more relevant example, which is pretty crazy. At a cement manufacturer, the IT manager was running a crypto mining rig in their server room because everything was so underutilized. So now he's allowing inbound access, outbound access, and he's running crypto mining in the corporate organization using their electricity, their bandwidth, even if it was on his own equipment.
Well, the servers were sitting there. Come on. I think that's actually kind of clever.
But it goes back to that uptime thing where you want those machines to have capacity, because if you push a button and the valve opens 5 seconds too late, you could be causing a very big problem. So you have to have capacity on that equipment.
Sure, that's interesting. Prishal's got an interesting question regarding patching those OT vulnerabilities. There's a fine line, there's a balance. We need 24/7. The cement factory can't close. Are you seeing better engagement from business to allow security teams to carry out these tasks to patch? Are they giving security teams time to get the environment secure? Or are we still fighting to educate? Maybe, Toma, from a Claroty perspective, you could answer that.
Yeah, so patching in the OT, that's a big challenge. It really depends on the environment. Some environments are more relaxed towards downtime. Okay. Some of them, you just cannot touch anything. So the main thing you need to do is, again, and I go back to, pretty much what Skybox is offering together, what we can fit into as part of the OT, is managing your risks and understanding which device are vulnerable, what kind of vulnerabilities they have, how can they be accessed. And from that point on, at some point you could do, I would call it virtual patching, in a way where you would be able to start doing some further segmentation or micro segmentation around that and ensure you have the right signatures triggered against those specific vulnerabilities on the gateways and so forth. But patching, in generally speaking, in the OT, I wouldn't say is non-existent, because after the Tricon attack in Saudi Aramco, it was only safety system. Everybody went and updated their Schneider equipment every oil and gas sector. But it really, really requires something that compelling that they would go for that. So
great question. We've got 8 minutes left, and I want to ask each of you a question as a wrap on where we are going here. So I'm going to start with Justin, then to Thomas, so we get Skybox, then Claroty, and then end with Alistair. Justin, from a perspective of you and Skybox, what are you quite excited about in the next 6 months pertaining to these converged security and converged networks? What's coming out that we can look forward to from the Skybox side?
We've just moved from an old school Java interface with all of our data to a new web interface that's actually based on Elasticsearch and the ELK stack. What this means is we're no longer looking at structured data, but we're looking at all the data that we're collecting in an entire data lake, and we're able to start manipulating and playing with this data and getting very meaningful and actionable, intelligent results and dashboards and reports that are just truly fantastic. So we're able to give a lot more insight to a lot more different people in the organization. Traditionally, we'd be giving insight to guys like the executive, to auditors, to engineers, but now we're able to give very, very specific insight to people who are looking after particular environments and divisions. So the new dashboard is outstanding. One thing that it does is it allows us to give exact cash value or like downtime value per risk. So we're understanding risk not only in terms of the downtime, but also in terms of the cash value of loss. So like showing business impact analysis and how that truly the vulnerabilities are exposed for that.
So if that bottling machine goes down for 10 minutes, you're going to be able to show the cash impact of that 10 minutes. That's really interesting. Wow. And for POC or access to that, the guys can contact you.
Absolutely.
Brilliant. Tomer, from Claroty, anything coming up in the next 6 months you're almost too excited about? And do we get it to play with?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually just recently launched our new discovery tool, OT discovery tool, which requires minimum overhead in terms of network changes, infrastructure, and so forth, hosting environment. that provides very, very detailed visibility, similar to the way we do it through our native passive sniffing or listening to the network communication. So that is really, really coming now, and it is available. We're also looking at how we can fit better the Skybox overall to build this entire cybersecurity posture that will be coming in very soon.
And you're going to be traveling to South Africa soon to visit.
Yeah, whenever you go green.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Alistair, as the head of the business development from a Skybox perspective, what question should I have asked you? What question would you have liked to have been asked discussing these converged environments?
So I think for me, it kind of goes back and extends on what Justin and Toma have both been talking about. It's kind of, where are we today and where are we going? And, you've heard today just really kind of a fairly small insight as to, one area in which we operate. And I think one of the things which is fascinating about Skybox is we're able to do what we do irrespective of how the customer chooses to deploy their infrastructure. So, you've heard predominantly, use cases around sort of, vulnerability identification, vulnerability prioritization, remediation, segmentation, these types of things. Other areas that we've not spoken about are things like context-aware change management. So giving organizations the ability to really understand the impact of proposed changes in advance of making those changes on the infrastructure. So understanding that if I make this change, will that reduce the level of segmentation that I have between my IT network and my OT network. Understanding that if I open up connectivity, am I exposing vulnerabilities that previously were inaccessible? So this idea of being able to categorize vulnerabilities as, existing, is there a known vulnerability for that? Are they being actively exploited in the wild? Are they accessible or exposed given the existing network infrastructure and security controls that I have in place? And then what's the impact of change in advance of making that change? And being able to do that across traditional IT, OT, public cloud like AWS, Azure, Google Cloud Platform, but also private cloud as well, which we're seeing increasing adoption of things like Cisco ACI and VMware NSX.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I've learned a huge amount. Alistair, thank you for giving us your time. Toma, thank you for being with us and identifying what's going on. And Justin, for bringing a local flavor to it. In the middle of October and cyber awareness, I think the more and more we understand that it is our responsibility as users, as consumers, and as employees for security, that we have to do our thing, because the environment is just simply too big for the authorities. We can't sit back and be victimized. And there are solutions out there. Between Skybox and Claroty, they offer a wide range of solutions. And this area, which is maybe a little bit more immature from a security perspective, the OT environment, certainly I didn't know about it until you guys started educating me. You should just sit up and listen. From my side, Daniel Robus, I want to thank you for indulging me, the panelists and the audience, for some of my questions, which may be off-piste, but I enjoyed the session, and I'm going to hand back to Carrie. Thank you.
Thanks again, guys, for attending today. I know I found it insightful. Lots of times I giggled and learned a lot. So I hope that you also got a lot of your questions answered. So we always do appreciate your feedback on our sessions. Let me know what you thought of today's session and what you'd like to see in future webinars. We will be reporting the event feedback on Tech Central in the next couple of days, so I'll let you know when this is live. Cheers, guys. Have an awesome day further. Stay safe, and we'll see you at the next one.